Hello, everybody, and welcome to another cPanel Live broadcast. My name is Phil, and I'm a community manager with cPanel. Joining us today is Mr. David Stokes from MySQL, also a community manager. He's going to be presenting his talk on MySQL 8 for DBAs and DevOps. As always, thank you for joining us, and please join us on our social media channels where you can find more cPanel Live events at twitch.tv/cpaneltv, at facebook.com/cpanel. Discord is go.cpanel.net/discord. You can also join us and ask questions in our Discord channel. And twitter.com/cpanel, youtube.com/cpanel, and all of those good things. And if you guys stick around, we do have a live survey. We appreciate your feedback. You have a chance to win an Amazon gift card. And without further ado, let's hear from Mr. Stokes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. My name is Dave Stokes. I am a MySQL community manager, which means until earlier this year, I went around the world, paid for by Oracle Corporation, evangelizing MySQL products, and now I'm doing a lot of it from my home office. This is my second presentation, second webinar for the cPanel folks, and thank you to them for letting me come in and talk today about some new stuff in MySQL. Now, a little while ago, I did another presentation for y'all on MySQL 8. It was mainly on what developers see for the changes, and I was asked to come back and do this a little bit more focus on what the DevOps folks see. Let me go on before get too much further and get to the Safe Harbor Agreement. Basically, this is legalese, saying that if I get off on a tangent during the Q&A later and we get into future products, please note that I do not have full knowledge of future products, therefore my knowledge is not perfect, and take anything I say about future products with a grain of salt. Now, mainly today I'm talking about the free open community edition of MySQL. There's also an enterprise edition. We can get into that a little later. But basically, this slide is basically telling you if I talk about something that's a future product, please disregard it as being 100% truthful. Now, MySQL 8 is now available with cPanel and WHM V88. So V88 and MySQL 8 together. Woohoo! MySQL 8 was a big change over previous versions. Previous version was MySQL 5.7, and this is a general overview. There's a lot of stuff I'm just kind of skimming the cream of. There's a lot of good material that I have to pass over just for the amount of time that we have. And hopefully, if you have the opportunity, you should probably check out the release notes and look at some of the blogs out there on the changes. It's an amazing amount of work that's gone into this. Now, if you're using MySQL 5.6, it reaches end of life February 5th, 2021. It's not long for this world. So if you're running 5.6, please upgrade to 5.7 and hopefully straight to 5.8. This is not a good status if you're running something earlier than 5.6. So please take your time. By the way, you do have to go 5.0 to 5.1, 5.1 to 5.5, 5.5 to 5.6, 5.6 to 5.7. You cannot skip a step. A lot of metadata changes. If you're running 5.7, you can run our new shell. It has an upgrade utility script that will walk you through anything that might catch you, like use of a reserved word, SQL syntax that, or table definitions that no longer fit the modern syntax, and some other stuff out there. So please plan to upgrade as soon as you can. So for those of you who don't know what MySQL is, you stumbled into this. It's 25 years old, just like the PHP and Java programming languages. Funny how they all kind of popped up around the same time. Well, MySQL is a relational database management system. It is free under the GNU Public License version 2 for the Community Edition. You can download it. We have it in all sorts of binary editions. There's even source code if you want that. Go out to GitHub and pull down the code there. There's a licensed Enterprise Edition. The big differences there is you get the best monitoring tool out there, the best backup tool, at-rest encryption, data masking, a firewall that learns how your queries work, and then when you switch it on, anything that doesn't match the pattern that you've been doing, it rejects those queries. The best keychain management out there for encryption. The trouble with encryption is not encrypting the data and decrypting, it's keeping the keys safe and being able to rotate those without having to do a lot of extra work. And plus you also get that all-important phone number that you can call for support. Also, MySQL is a NoSQL JSON document store database. No longer do you have to set up relational tables, indexes, all that other stuff. Connect to the MySQL server, determine what schema you want to use, open up a document collection, kind of like a file drawer, and start writing documents into there, all without structured query language. MySQL also has a lot of other software out there. The language connectors that you probably know about for things like PHP, Java, .NET, Python. Also MySQL Router that I'll talk a lot about later today, the new shell, InnoDb cluster, Replica Sets, MySQL Workbench, and a whole bunch more. Now, when I start talking about MySQL 8 to a crowd that's been running MySQL for a while, the question pops up, what happened to MySQL 6 and MySQL 7? Well, back over a decade ago, there was an early version of MySQL called 6.0. It was a testing ground for a lot of new ideas. Unfortunately, it didn't quite come to fruition, and all the good ideas were backported into MySQL 5.1, 5.5, and later series. Also, our NDB cluster software, which is a shared nothing, high available clustering software that you can actually replicate between data centers all around the world. It's used by the big phone companies to track your cell phone as it goes between tower and tower. They've been using the 7 series for quite a long time. They've now ported all their stuff over to 8, by the way. So engineering thought, well, let's go to this new 8.0. We've done a lot of work, a lot of hard work, and we've kind of earned the new number. And I think you'll agree when you see some of the stuff that we've done. As I mentioned earlier, a few months ago, I did a presentation that was mainly developer focused, and this time I'm more DevOps centric. Talked to my DevOps buddies, and I said, what's your big 3 questions about MySQL from a DevOps perspective? And they all came up with the same answer. Replication, replication, and replication. Before we jump into that, let me talk about some of the big changes. Some of these I'll cover a little bit later. Other ones I'll just kind of skim over here. Some of the big changes in 8.0 were the true data dictionary. You're no longer tied to inodes. All your metadata used to be kept in libty files, .frm, MYIs, MYDs. If you've ever gone onto var lib MySQL in the past and seen the plethora of tables under there, that was all your metadata, and kind of dangerous to keep there. Now we put it all in the database because the InnoDb storage engine knows how to roll back to a set point in time so you can recover from it. We learned the hard way a couple of releases ago with replication that it's much simpler and much more reliable to do that. So now all the metadata is within an InnoDB schema. The big benefit to that is you can now have millions of tables within a schema. The downside is you can now have millions of tables within a schema. So some of the other changes that we're going to talk about or kind of skim over here. Resource groups, you'll see how that works in a little bit. This is where you take virtual CPUs from your many cores and dedicate them to a certain class of query, so like batch, and the optimizer knows how to push those queries off to those CPUs. Faster backup. The new MySQL shell has a lot of interesting utilities. There's 2 of them out there called dump schema and dump instance. If you're not running our enterprise backup, these are amazing tools, very, very fast, and there's a restore tool that goes with it. Also, we've gone big steps recently to compress the heck out of everything we can. For example, replication logs are compressed on the primary. As they go over the network, they're kept compressed. And when they get to the replica, they don't need to be uncompressed for the server to read it and apply those changes to the data. So less disk space, less network traffic. Also, the new temp table is very impressive. In the past, if you were doing something that required a temp table and it got to a predetermined size, everything would halt. All that work would be copied over to an InnoDb table and then restarted. Not exactly efficient and kind of a time waster. So we've now come up with a new temp table that is 10 to 20% faster depending on what you're doing. By the way, new server is also optimized around UTF-8 and B4. You get all 4 panes of the Unicode 9.0 character set. So that gives you all the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean ideograms that you want, plus everyone's favorite, the emojis. MySQL has gone to a CI/CD model, like a lot of you have. The most recent release we had, 8.021, came out in July of 2019. The releases before that were in April, January, October, and then again July. So we're pretty good at hitting the every 3-month benchmark. That may change if we have a fix we got to get out there, or we have something that's dragging, but we try to shoot for every 3 months to give you a new version. Well, why are we doing this often? Well, it used to be that for us to put new features out there, it would take years. But this way, we can give you new features when we get them engineered. It also gives you a much more robust and much more reliable piece of code to run. So as I mentioned earlier, my DevOps friends keep telling me they want to know more about replication, and in particular, a new InnoDb cluster. In the past, we've had asynchronous replication, which is where the primary makes a change to its copy of the data and writes the change information out to a log file. That change information gets copied over the network to the replica. Replica reads those changes, applies it to its copy of the data, and therefore everything should be in sync. That's asynchronous replication. We also feature semi-synchronous replication, have had for years. That's where the replica will send back a notice to the primary saying, hey, I have a copy of the data, you can keep going. The master will actually wait till the replica says, I have a copy of the changes. It may not have been applied, but I have a copy of the changes before the master goes on or the primary goes on. Also, replica sets, which I'll talk about later. This, if you've done replication in the past, you're going to appreciate that we've taken some of the more rigorous parts of it and automated it. We're also talking about MySQL router. Now, this is a nice little diagram of the way we'd like you to think about things. Your app servers are running with copies of MySQL router on there. MySQL router is a very lightweight level 4 router designed to be hosted on your application platform. Your application talks to the router. Your application shouldn't care with anything behind there. It doesn't know if it's 1 server or 25 servers. Your application should only care that this is where it reads and this is where it writes from to the database. Very interesting that if this is a very lightweight level 4 router. If you need something higher, like a level 7 router, we do recommend Proxy SQL, but it's not one of our products. MySQL router talks to the InnoDb cluster. Well, InnoDb cluster is actually made up of router, group replication, and shell. Group replication is our communications medium between the various servers in the cluster. It's designed to be very elastic. You can roll in and roll out servers as you need. Very fault tolerant. Something happens to one of the servers, the other machines will transition over. The only caveat is that if you're trying to perform a write and it doesn't go through, the machine that you're connected through the proxy, the router, to might have had some sort of problem. You'll have to test the result code returned to your application. And if it, hey, I wasn't able to write this, message comes back, please retry your write. By the way, this runs in single primary mode where you do a read-write split between the machines. One does all the reads and writes, and the other ones just do read-only. There's also multiple primary where all the machines do all the work at the same time. So if you send a write off to one of the machines in the cluster and you're running multi-primary mode, all the other machines will update at roughly the same time. And then we use MySQL Shell for administration. This is an amazing tool. It has 3 very interesting modes. One's structured query language, SQL, as you expect, and there's Python and JavaScript. So if you have libraries for either of those 2 languages that you like to use, you can use those. Also, you can write your own little utilities and store them in the shell for future use. So if you have utilities to go out there and figure out what your fragmentation levels are, your disk usage, the ownership of various files or schemas, you can run all your little reports out there and save them in the shell for future use. Now, what I'm going to talk you through this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are, is a Sandbox Test. All you'll need is a laptop or little tower box running MySQL's latest version, and we're going to set up a Sandbox cluster for InnoDb cluster. Now, the reason I'm having you start here is you're only really shooting one machine in the foot if something goes wrong. I'm an old DBA. I tend to plan for the worst and then plan everything around that happening. But that won't happen here today. So what you're going to do is you get a machine running MySQL 8.0, or if this is seen much later after 22 or 23 come out, please use the latest version you can. What you're going to do is you're going to start up the MySQL server, and we're going to set up a sandbox. Well, the reason I'm having you start up with a sandbox is that there's a lot of networking issues and other configuration issues that trying to get 3 machines synced up at the same time, it's kind of messy, and it's not really good for a webinar like this. So I'm going to start off with the simplest way to do this. So the first thing you do is use the new shell, MySQL SH, and log into your local instance. As you can see here, I highlighted it here in yellow. Once you're logged in, you run the command DBA. This is DBA is a bunch of utilities that we have out there just for DBA type functionalities. We also have a general utility class. We also have a class for database functions. But one of the ones for the DBA functions is called deploy sandbox instance. And in this case, we're going to start it listening to port 3310. Now, this will set a bunch of things in motion. The most notable one you'll notice is under your home directory, there will be a new directory created, MySQL-sandboxes, and under there you'll see that it's going to create one for port 3310, and it will write a whole bunch of metadata out there and some stuff. And it will not require a password. Use something simple and use the same password for all the 3 instances we're going to set up. And it will go out there and carve up your sandbox instance at 3310. Now we're going to deploy a sandbox to 2 other machines. A way to do that is DBA.deploy sandbox instance. This time, instead of 3310, we're using 3320. Once again, this goes out under your home directory, MySQL-sandboxes, and creates the 3320 directory and puts some information out there. Use the same password as the time before. And for those of you who are kind of seeing how this is going, step 4 is also DBA deploy sandbox instance, but this time to port 3330. So now we have 3 clustered machines in the sandbox at 3310, 3320, and 3330. So we're going to connect to the first node. We could have picked any of these, but just randomly we're picking 3310. And you notice that the shell will actually save your password for you. It is encrypted, and it is a handy way to go, or you don't have to save it. So in this case, we've logged in as root on localhost 3310. And from here, we're going to create the cluster. Now that JS you see at the top, that's telling us that we're in JavaScript mode in the new shell. So I'm actually going to set up a JavaScript variable called cluster, and that's going to get information from the DBA objects for creating cluster, and we're going to very creatively call our cluster cPanel. And if you read through the verbiage that comes in after, it will tell you that, oh, this is a sandbox, so there's some things that sandboxes are good for testing, and it's going to expect to have the other machines on the same host, and it's going to tell you that it's expecting to listen on 127.0.0.1 port 3310, and it will test to make sure that the hardware configuration or the software configuration is suitable. We're going to set up a normal cluster non-sandbox. This is a little bit more involved, and I'll show you how to do that later. Now, there's a group replication channel where all the members talk to each other, and that is going to be on port 33101. So if you have some funky firewall stuff, please unblock 3310, 3320, 3330, and that 33101. So this is our seed instance, and the cluster is created. And it will warn you that you need at least 3 instances to be able to handle at least one server failure. So the next step is add the second machine to the cluster, very much like the previous step, but we're going to use cluster.addInstance, and it goes out there and adds the second machine to the cluster. Now, it gives you that lovely notice in there where it says the target instance at 3320 has not been pre-provisioned. The GTID set is empty. All transactions have a global transaction identifier, and in this case, the second machine is coming on saying, okay, I'm talking to the master, but I don't see any replication traffic yet. So I'm not going to worry about that. I want to provision a brand new instance, and what I'm going to do out there is I want to use clone provisioning. That's kind of cute, and I'll get into a little more detail on that. Clone is extremely fast and a great way to move data between machines. Now, there is an incremental way of doing this, but I do not recommend it. It's slow, and I'd rather have you do GTIDs. Now, in the past, when you set up replication, I'll go into that more when we get to replica sets. There's a lot of steps involved, but it makes it a lot easier. So on this step, we've added the second node to the cluster, and the next step, we're going to keep going. Let me go into clone. It says, please select a recovery method, clone, incremental recovery, or abort, and you want clone. It actually is going to clone the InnoDb table spaces from the primary machine, our machine at 3310. And it warns you that it's going to communicate the clone traffic on port 33201. It goes out and validates the instance, the software configuration of the server at 3320. Once again, it notices the sandbox, and once the two machines are communicating, it will actually do the clone provisioning. In this page here, you'll see that it's adding the instance to the cluster, and then it starts copying the data over. It does a copy of the files that are out there for the information on the database. Then it starts copying over the InnoDb pages, and then the redo pages. The redo pages are part of the ACID compliance, so you can have rollback. So you've done all this one step. It's gone out there, connected to the machine at 3310, and copied all over the data. We have two machines with the same data, and they're in a cluster together. Now, here's a nice little graphic of all that's been going on with the clone operation. You basically have a donor machine, and it copies over everything it has in its InnoDB table space. The big problem here for some of you, if you're still running InnoDB, if you're running MyISAM, please go over to InnoDB. It's better performance than MyISAM, has row level locking instead of table level locking, a whole bunch of other benefits. So anything that's in the InnoDB table space on the donor will be sent over to the recipient, and it is very, very, very fast. So still adding the second node to the cluster. Once everything's copied over, the second machine will be restarted, and when it restarts, it will tell you how long the cloning process it took, and now everything's set up a recovery state, and now you have a two-node cluster. So next step is add the third node to the cluster, and this is at the machine at 3330. And similar steps will ask you how do you want to recover this, and you put in clone, and it does exactly what you saw in the previous step. So now you can actually go out there and take a look at the cluster. Once again, we're at the shell prompt in JavaScript. Cluster.status reports that our cluster is named cPanel. If you go down there, two-thirds of the way down the page on the left-hand column, you'll see that the machine 3310 is in mode read-write. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that the other machines are read-only. Replication is running between the two machines. The status for all three of them is online. The role is high availability. And on the right-hand side, almost at the bottom, it tells you the topology mode is single primary. Then we start MySQL router. These steps only need to be run this way with the bootstrap option one time. When you bootstrap it, you point it to the machine that's the primary, and it gets a whole bunch of information and metadata. From here on, router will monitor all the machines in that cluster. The cluster machines monitor each other. Router knows which machines are busy, which ones are not. It's kind of like Santa Claus, and it will actually load balance and round robin stuff for you as the traffic comes through. So the first time you run router, it goes out and creates the admin accounts for you, verifies that everything's okay, and stores information in a keyring. The next step this is actually router continued, is it make sure that everything's talking, and here you can see it's talking to our cluster cPanel, and it will tell you that everything's happy. Now, the next time you run router, MySQL router, and then you point it to the router configuration. For those of you used to configuring MySQL Server, the configuration stuff looks very similar, and there's really not a whole lot to do there. MySQL router is very lightweight, very simple. Now, our cluster cPanel is up and running, and how do you talk to it? Well, with our classic protocol, the SQL protocol only, as you see in green, MySQL minus U for user, root minus P, which means it's going to prompt you for a password, and then uppercase P for port 6446. This will be intercepted by MySQL router, and router will hand the traffic off to one of the three machines we set up in the sandbox. If it's a read, it's going to go to the any of the three boxes. If it's write, it's only going to go to the primary. Once you write to the primary, the replication traffic will be set up to go to the other machines. So almost instantaneously, all three machines have the same data. Now, if you want to split it up where you know you do a lot of reads, you can send it directly to port 6447. Now, if you're using our X protocol, which handles the SQL traffic plus the NoSQL traffic, the port is incremented by a 0, so 64460. Here's another picture of the architecture. Once again, your application is the little light blue box with a MySQL connector. The connector talks to router, and that's all your application needs to know, how to talk to the router. From there on, router handles all the traffic into the high availability cluster. If something happens to one of the machines, the other machines know about it and adjust accordingly. If you need to roll in a new machine for Christmas, you can do so and then roll it back after the returns in January or February. It can handle all that. And it's all administrated by the MySQL shell. Okay, Dave, that's great, but I actually want multi-masters or multi-primaries. Well, it's real simple. Cluster.switch to multi-primary mode. There's also a switch to single primary mode command. And once you put it in the switch to primary mode, the machines talk to each other, and 3330, as you can see here, was moved from secondary to primary. Warns you here that 3310 remains primary, and then 3320 was switched from secondary to primary. And now we have three nodes that will coordinate whenever there's an update to the data. In this case, if you look at cluster status, you see that we still have our cluster name cPanel. Also, if you look down a couple lines from under cluster name, you'll see SSL required. By default, we do everything with SSL. If you don't need it, you can turn it off. We found it's much easier just to turn it on to make sure your data is secure. And if you're behind a firewall, DMZ'd off and all that, you want to turn it off, you can, but by default, we turn on security. If you take a look at our three nodes, you see 3310 is in read-write mode. You'll see 3320 is in read-write mode, and as well as the other machine at 3330. And the topology mode is multi-primary. Those of you who are really sharp notice that the previous cluster status, all the machines were version 8.0.20. I did an upgrade on my machine while I was running these slides up there, and upgrade to 8.0.21. Also notice our topology mode here, if you see my mouse here, it is multi-primary. And the group information source number for right now is at 127.0.0.1.33.1.0. So things are happy, your application is talking to MySQL router, and something happens. Router's monitoring how the machines are doing and does some load balancing. So if one of the machines just getting absolutely slammed by heavy updates and another one's kind of lazily there, the traffic will be adjusted accordingly. Now, if you're doing this outside of sandbox mode, you're doing it with multiple machines or multiple containers, although I recommend databases aren't for ephemeral data, so containers can get dangerous if you're applying for them to stick around for a long time, because they're not designed to be that. They're kind of designed to be ephemera. What you're going to do is on each of the machines, you're going to do DBA.configure local instance. It will check the configuration of your MySQL server. It will make sure that everything is in good state. It will ask you if it's okay to change things that need to be changed, and then it will reboot. Once you have all three machines configured, it's as easy as you saw before. Var cluster is DBA create cluster, test cluster in this example. Add the two other machines, our bootstrap router, boom, away you go. Literally, you can have, depending on the speed of your machine and your network and all that, you can have a highly available fault-tolerant cluster in under 10 minutes, easily under 5 minutes if you're lucky, depending on your underlying infrastructure. Now, Replica Set borrows a lot from InnoDb cluster. Traditionally, when you're setting up MySQL replication, you had your main machine, and you set up a brand new machine. You did a backup on your primary, and got that back up over SneakerNet, SCP, FTP, whatever, to get it over to the replica. Then you started that MySQL instance with that data, and meanwhile the primary is still working, so you tell the replica, okay, go out to the replication log on the primary and start reading at this position that you noted when you did the backup. And a lot of people always forget to do that. And from then on, the two machines, the replica would get copies of what changed on the primary and apply it to its copy of the data, and everything would stay the same. Well, we added global transaction identifiers, so you didn't have to play with file positions on the primary. And it's great. A lot of people rely on this, but Replica Set takes care of a lot of the nasty parts for you, a lot of the labor-intensive parts. Especially lets you use the clone plugin, which is great. I really recommend InnoDb cluster whenever possible because it is fault tolerant, it is highly available. There's a lot of tooling out there in the MySQL shell to help you administer stuff. But if you really don't need it, it's like you only have two machines and the data is not that critical, you don't really need to be highly available or fault tolerant. If it's down overnight, if something goes wrong at 6 p.m. after everyone's left at 5:30, no one's really going to have any heartburn over it. Use Replica Set. There is no automatic failover. If something goes wrong with your primary, someone's going to have to adjust stuff to get it to promote the replica to the primary and make sure the application is talking to that machine. Also, there's no protection from partial data loss from unexpected halt or unavailability. You can lose data, although it's not going to be that much. Also, InnoDb cluster has some heuristics to keep your data coherent and consistent in the case of something catastrophic happening. If with Replica Set, a failover promotes a secondary while the former primary is still available, so like a network partition, someone unplugged something at the wrong time, you could get two sets of inconsistent data, which is always fun to make consistent and get back together. Configure Replica Set is real easy. DBA, configure Replica Set instance, and create the Replica Set, and then add the second machine. If you have an existing replica out there with semi-sync or asynchronous, there is a command out there that will, it's an argument to the create replica set function. They'll go out there and take everything from your existing setup and add it to the new replica set. Some other things I wanted to note. If you're doing DevOps work that you really probably ought to know about with MySQL 8.0. First is resource groups. I mentioned this earlier. Imagine you're running a multi-core machine and you have different classes of queries, let's put it out there. You can create a resource group. In this case, we're creating a resource group called batch. We're going to assume that you have at least 4 CPUs. We're going to grab CPUs 2 and 3 and give it a very low priority and call that batch. Now, with your queries, you either type in set resource group batch or put a comment inside the query that says the resource group is batch. And when your query comes through the server, it knows how to route it to those 2 CPUs only. So if you have some low priority stuff that you want to batch in, that's fine. If you have some high priority stuff that you want to have a higher priority queue, this is great for that. Optimizer hints. If you know how to optimize queries, you probably are aware that MySQL wants to optimize every query every time it sees it. It doesn't learn from repeated viewings of the query. Looks like you know that it's faster if you join T1 to T2, even though the operator wants to do T2 to T1. You can actually put a query in your, a comment in your query. In this case, join order T1, T2, and the optimizer will believe you, and it won't try to re-optimize that query away from that. User attributes. Those of you who are old enough remember all logins and all systems were 6 characters, and if you had a similar name to somebody else or you had an ID number in there, it got kind of messy. Now we have a way to, when you create a user, to put some attributes out there. In this case, we're using a create user and identified by the password, and then we have a comment that says this user is Dave. This is kind of the G-code field in a Linux or Unix etc password table. And whoops, it didn't. There we go. It didn't show there. It kind of rolled off the end of the screen. Actually, let me go to the next screen. Also, you could use, instead of comment, you use the keyword attribute, and what happens is there's some metadata within the account that tells you who's there. So you can put in the person's office number, phone number, their name, what project they're working on, all that sort of stuff. If you're using an alter user on there, you can keep appending to that field. You have a gig of data that you can throw out there. This is very handy if you have a lot of accounts with similar names or different project accounts. You want to make sure that, accounting number 15, who's accounting 15? You have to say, oh, that's Joe Jones. Something else we've added with the most recent release is that you can turn off redo logging. In a case where you're restoring a machine, you're making a copy of your production over to test. When you want to bring the new machine up, you can temporarily turn off redo logging, and as you load in the data, it goes in very, very, very quickly. Redo logging is for transactions, where if you're changing a line and you decide you don't want to commit that transaction, you can roll it off. Well, if you're reloading a new machine, you don't need that. I mentioned earlier the binary log transaction compression. So as your primary is writing out the queries that are changing the data, that information is compressed with the ZSTD algorithm, and the replicas grab that in a compressed format, take it over the wire to its own copy. It's not decompressed, so it saves disk space and network bandwidth. Another interesting feature is dual passwords. I was wondering about this when it first came out, and then it hit me. How many times have you been in a project and the project manager comes in and says, yeah, for security reasons, we have to rotate the password. Please go out there and change all 642 applications by the end of the day and let me know. Well, you can fire up Emacs and hit star.php and work on all 682 programs at once. Or what you can do is create a secondary password. The example here, we're altering an account called Dave at deardave.xyz, and we give it a second password identified by deardave2, and we give the qualifier retain current password. So now the account has two passwords. So we can go through and change, update the password on the applications as we can in our leisure and test them. It's not an all or none situation. And when we're finally satisfied that all 682 applications have the new password, we can just expire the primary password and away we go. Something I'd like to recommend to you is the book MySQL 8 Query Performance Tuning, a systemic method for improving execution speeds. If you're playing with MySQL 8, if you're dedicated to MySQL 8, or you're even just tangentially interested in MySQL 8, this is the book. It's written by my buddy Jesper Wisborg Crow, who used to be employed by MySQL. He's gone off to bigger, if not better, things. Believe me, I'm on my third rereading in this book over the past 4 months I've had it, and I'm still finding new stuff in there. It is great. He was one of our gurus of our support team. You really need a copy of this book. Well, if you're looking for MySQL on the internet, I really recommend hitting mysqlcommunity.slack.com. A lot of our engineers are out there, so in the various sub-channels, if you have questions about InnoDB, replication, general DBA, ask me anywhere, community tools, this is the place to go. Not as heavily trafficked anymore is forums.mysql.com. This is another good resource. Our engineers monitor a lot of the groups on this, but not as actively. I'd like to also point out we still have mysql.com. If you like reading about MySQL, there's a blog aggregator for the community at planet.mysql.com, and you can follow us on Twitter at MySQL. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. I've gone a little bit longer than I thought I would, but we're making good time. If you need to contact me, I'm easy to track down. Dave Stokes, MySQL Community Team, david.stokes@oracle.com. Twitter handles @Stoker. My main blog's at elephantdolphin.blogger.com. These slides are going to be up at slideshow.net/DavidMStokes. And if you're playing with the JSON data type or using the JSON data type, I wrote a book on that, just that. It's now getting a little dated. I am working on a second edition, but this is full of program examples and explanations of how things work with the JSON data type within MySQL. And with that, we're going to go into Q&A. So please don't be shy, and let's have your questions.
Come on. Here we go. Wow, Dave, that was a lot of information.
Probably too much.
No, but I'm sure our DBAs and DevOps out there really appreciate all that excellent information. So, as I recall, I met you at the WebPros Summit last year, and the number one burning question that I had for you was, now I've been in hosting for about 10 years, so I've heard it pronounced a couple of different ways. Is it MySQL or is it MySQL?
Well, the old timers prefer MySQL, but it really doesn't matter. Our former CEO, Martin Miko, said it doesn't matter as long as you use the product. Now, to give trivia to all this, the founder of MySQL had a daughter named My, which in Finnish is pronounced Mu. So I guess we should be calling it MuSQL.
MuSQL.
But MySQL is the preferred by most of the folks.
All right. So we've got a few questions here. Again, wanted to thank you for your time. We super appreciate you being here. It's always excellent to see a little bit further in depth in the open source community and products that we offer. And as you know, it's incredible to learn more about these tools that we use every day. So let's get started with, can you speak a little bit more about the MySQL shell?
The MySQL shell is our replacement for the old command line tool. It is kind of a unique thing in that it has a Python and JavaScript interpreter built into it, Python 3 before anyone asks. It also has an SQL mode. So if you have libraries in Python or JavaScript that you like to use with your data, you can include those. You can also write scripts to do things like go out and get queries from your system, go out and actually look at the performance schema and other things that are going on out there. And you can actually run that with a watch command. So if you have something you want to run every 30 seconds to see what the process list looks like at that. Along with that, there's a whole bunch of objects in there for things like utilities for backups. We have some backups that are going to back up either schemas or entire instances very quickly. And I have another one for restoration of that. There's other utilities out there for checking the status of your 5.7 system before you upgrade to 8.0. Make sure you're not using reserved words, things like that. Also, there's a small library being compiled by my European counterpart of various little utilities you can throw in there to run all that. Also, we have access to our NoSQL features of MySQL. Basically, what you can do now is connect to the server, connect to a schema. We use schema and database too interchangeably in the MySQL world. And from there, you open up a document collection and can start writing JSON documents without having to go out there and set up schemas, relations, indexes, and all that. So if you're in one of those situations where your boss tells you, hey, start writing your code today, we'll tell you what you're actually doing next week after the focus group gets to us, it's a great way to get working that way.
Outstanding. Now, a little bit further on Shell, can you talk a little bit more about Shell reporting?
Shell reporting, you can actually write your own little reports and do whatever you want. So if you want to go out there and look at the number of dirty pages that are actively going on the server, get information from sysschema for like the index hit rate, the cardinality of your columns, stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. The community's writing a whole bunch of stuff. We're writing some. And it's very exciting. The Shell's been around for 2 years, but it's really funny how it's skyrocketing the past couple of months now that everyone's stuck at home and they're writing all these great little utilities.
Indeed, indeed. So I heard some barking in the background. What kind of dog do you have?
Well, I have a 12-year-old beagle. You're not hearing him unless you hear a snoring sound. And I swear that's not me. I also have a 4-year-old black-mouthed cur. The dog in the book Old Yeller was a black-mouthed cur, but for various reasons, Walt Disney sold out and went with a yellow lab. They're very smart, very intelligent, and they tend not to like having closed doors in the house. She can't actually open the doorknob. I'm kind of surprised she hasn't come in here.
As a matter of fact, I have mine. I have a Dachshund Lab mix who is fast asleep in the corner of the room over there. I'm sure he was tired of hearing his dad's voice and decided I'm just going to conk out for the afternoon. So can you kind of give us a sneak peek at what's coming in future versions?
I don't want to go too far down the road on what I guess is what's going to happen, but officially off the record, just between you, me, and the 30 other people that are online who are watching this, I think you're going to see a lot more done in security. Bosses are talking cloud, but they're really buying security. You're also going to see a lot more stuff for cloud enhancements, especially to administer stuff in the clouds. I'm not quite sure Kubernetes is the way of the future. I want a system that seems a little bit more engineered than what seems like a series of Bourne shell scripts to me. That's personal opinion. You're going to see a lot more stuff pop up in the shell. There's some stuff we're doing where we benchmark the server all the time, and our folks who take care of that, they find one mutex that they take out, they rewrite it to go around that. And of course, the next link in the chain is the next pain point, like the redo log. If you're loading up a new server from a backup, if you turn off the redo log, things load up a lot faster. So you're seeing a lot of things like that, where we're trying to make it easier for you that if you are in the cloud and you do have a backup, you can zing it up. Things like the clone plugin, where you can take an entire InnoDb table space and take it from one machine and clone it to another machine. You're going to see a lot more of that.
So we have another question in. Can you tell us more about the load balancing in the router, and are there any settings or configurations that are available?
Not per se. The router was designed to be very, very lightweight, so it wouldn't actually have a lot of configuration options, just to keep you from shooting yourself in your foot. If you're really worried about that, it mainly does round robining. So it pays attention to that. If you're looking for something a little more complex, there's things like proxy SQL, but that takes a little more engineering and a little more thought. Router's designed to be super lightweight, sit on the same platform as your application, and be a level 4 router. If you need something more complex from that, like I mentioned, proxy SQL.
Well, Dave, we're running up on about an hour. So I wanted to point out at the bottom of the screen, as you can see down over there, we have a survey link that's at go.cpanel.net/4m. Please, if you have the time, go fill out our survey, and filling out that survey will enter you in a chance to win an Amazon gift card. And as always, David, we certainly appreciate your time. If there's any questions if there's any questions we get submitted afterwards or upon video on demand, which will be available at the completion of this video, we'll put it up on our YouTube page. It should be available on cPanel.live and all other places you can find cPanel videos. Yeah. We'll make sure to send those on over to you.
Okay, and thank you and all the folks at cPanel and all the attendees. By the way, attendees, if you have something that I didn't cover today, please let Phil and the others know at cPanel, and we'll see what we can do. We can put these together fairly quickly, and we literally have no other life other than to make you happy. So please let us know.
That's not very far from the truth. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, please follow us on all of our social channels. That's twitch.tv/cPanelTV, youtube.com/cPanelTV, facebook.com/cPanel, twitter.com/cPanel, and all of the other fun social media channels. Again, Dave, thank you for your time. Attendees, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next cPanel Live event. My buttons.